It's a great, great day. It's a good day. Get up.
Woo! It is a great day.
Sunshine.
Oh my goodness, risers and thrivers. I'm going to tell you soon why it's such a great day, but I hope you're dancing there with us and kicking off your day. I hope you're having the best day. I am so excited. We are back to live recordings after quite a long hiatus, and I sincerely apologize. I had to go inwards and do some self-reflection and really focus on my own survival. Last year was really tough with winter bugs, and I faced pneumonia and paraflu. And I even had mold in my lungs, of all things, in my new lovely lungs. I had these sutures that were floating around loose from my double lung transplant 8 years ago. And so I had to go through all of this stuff last year. And I'm sorry, but I really needed to retreat and go inwards. And I can't tell you how happy we are to be back, bringing you these stories of overcoming tribulation and struggle, and which we all face, and sharing tools of resilience and resolve and fortitude. And our guest today, Dr. Alex DiGiacomo, is an amazing example of exactly what we strive to do on this show. And I'm so excited to have her here with us today. Alex, welcome.
Thank you so much. This is amazing already.
Oh my gosh, look at her, risers and thrivers. Doesn't she just like make you happy? Like she's just a bundle of positive energy and light and beautifulness. You are just going to love her today. I can't wait to share her story. First, I'm back with a couple new scars. As my oldest son says, I went in with a skin cancer and came out with this brand new necklace. I don't know if you can see, but I loved his perspective on this. Life is all about perspective and how we choose to see our struggle and our adversity. And I was feeling quite self-conscious about this. And, my son's perspective was so true and so great. And I am here to shine my scars forth today and be proud of all the struggles that we've been through, right? Big week in my world. Gosh, I celebrated my 47th birthday, which is pretty cool after hearing the words I had 2 months to live when I was only 36 years old. So always such a moving time for me of the year. Not only that last week, but yesterday was the anniversary, if you want to call it that, of hearing those dire words that I had 2 months to live with this terminal leukemia prognosis, and having been even denied all further medical care aside from palliative care on that day. I hadn't even responded to salvage chemotherapy. I had 2 babies in tow, and gosh, sounds came out of me that I didn't even know existed before that moment. I left that hospital and I fought to go home. If I had months to live, I had so much living to do. And my efforts at that time, I didn't even think I could get into remission, to be perfectly honest. We had even had the same prognosis given to us by another leading leukemia institute in the States. And there was really no hope given. I just tried to maximize each and every day. And I fueled myself in a way that would help me take advantage of every single day and every single moment that I could with my babies and my young family. And incredibly, I've stretched out those 2 months, the 60 days that I was due to live, to now 4,000, I think, and 17 today. I mean, it's just this incredible gift, and I couldn't be luckier. And so big celebration yesterday. And then, gosh, even today, it's all just jam-packed, as I always say, that our worst day on the calendar, hold out hope, can always become our best day if we persevere and keep our head above water and keep going and never give up. Because although July 31st, 2012 was the day that I had heard I had 2 months to live, which, there's nothing that compares to. People are always asking me how I'm so happy despite everything I've gone through. And I assure you, there's nothing that can touch that moment. So, that was like the bottom of the barrel, and everything else just scrapes that surface. And anyhow, July 31st, 2012, again, the day that I heard I had 2 months to live. Then fast forward just 3 years later, July 31st, 2015 was the day I heard I had new lungs waiting. After my bone marrow transplant for leukemia, I ended up having a ton of rejection in my lungs. My new hardy immune system from my donor in Germany woke up, looked around, didn't recognize my own lungs, and embarked on this fierce process of attack. I felt at 80 pounds. I was crazy sick on full-time oxygen. And this gift of gifts that was bestowed with me has helped me, empowered me to be here today and to survive and to truly thrive with these lungs. Gosh, I stand on mountains and I ski down them all, and I'm just like the happiest mom ever. I get to be mom to my two amazing kids, and they're now 16 and 13. So gosh, big week. I've been super, super, super emotional. And whatever you are navigating today, hold on to hope, don't give up, and stay the course, and, go inwards, reflect, and hear the lessons that have come with your struggle. Everything in life is either a lesson or a blessing. And when we really take the time to go inwards and reflect, we can hear the lessons that we can so often miss otherwise. And it's those lessons that have awakened me and have helped me to live this rich and beautiful life that, I've already outlived any life I could have lived before this whole experience. And I feel like I'm the luckiest girl from having gone through it all. But anyhow, I digress.
Can I just say, Erica, like the thing that's so ironic to me, right, is this is the anniversary of the day you were told basically like you're going to die, right? And you were the most alive person I know, right? Like it's just, you're so alive, and your courage is just contagious. Like it kind of infects people, right? So it's so interesting because we don't know, like no one wants to say, oh, this happened for a reason, or you needed to have this happen in order for you to be happy. We don't want to say that, but like we cannot deny the silver lining, right? That came from that horrific struggle that you went through.
Oh, that's really nice that you said that. That means a lot. It makes, hearing those words makes every decision crystal clear,
Yes.
like it's just such a filter. Like for me, my North Star is, to be this, passionate mama for my two beautiful boys, and who gives back in every way I'm able to, and so every decision I make is in line with that. And I live a life with no regrets. And, before I had always been kind of on autopilot, going through the motions, checking off the boxes. This is what I'm doing. And don't get me wrong, I love life, but I missed so much of it, always waiting for what was coming next, and, I want to graduate so I can set up my own practice. And then once I had my own practice, I had a million other goals, and you never really like sink in and reflect to all that you've achieved and to the beauty of right now. And I think if I could describe the biggest silver lining for me, it's this calm in my heart of enjoying these simple silver linings of the moment of right now. Yeah.
I think you just articulated that so well. It's like there's a clarity that comes in crisis, right? It's like the noise gets drowned out, and it like somehow anchors you into your values. And it's such a precious experience, really, because without it, you could miss your whole life. Don't you think?
Even with struggle, we can miss it. And
Yes.
I almost did, when I was first diagnosed with cancer. It was like the world had been pulled out from under my feet, and I was entertaining 60 people every day in my hospital room. I was like, this is just a blip on the path, no big deal. And, you're trying to sort through the mechanics of who's going to watch the kids, who can take over at the house, all of these things, like it's a process, right?
Yeah.
And for me, I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be fine. I never let myself sink into it, and I was always trying to deflect those emotions. And I sure practiced a lot of emotional avoidance strategies by doing that, but that doesn't serve us, And so I was missing all the lessons until that time. So, there's not one thing that I did to cure myself from cancer by any stretch. If there were, we wouldn't have cancer. But for me, I think the most impactful part was the mindfulness piece, the meditation that I had adopted, and really just giving myself this safe space to feel and experience all the emotions that I had just pushed down before. call me crazy, but I feel like when we just push them down and we carry on that autopilot, I believe that those transform into mental health issues or physical health. It's energy, we're pushing that down and it's just not going anywhere. But for me, I finally let myself experience the grief of all that came with that diagnosis. It was about 7 weeks in, and I just fell to the floor and I cried and I cried and I cried for 4 days. And I had to miss so many moments. My son's 5th birthday party, my younger son, I had to abruptly stop nursing him. Like, I wasn't ready for all these things. I felt like I'd been incarcerated. But before that moment, I would weep these silent tears at night when no one was watching. But anytime anybody was there, I would be like, oh yeah, it's all great. Like, no problem. Come watch me on the exercise bike. What can I get you from the water fountain? And so for me, I really think it was finally giving myself that safe space to be really real. But in today's society, in the hospital setting anyhow, that's a problem. And you have to advocate for yourself to be able to do that, because that's when psychologists would come in, psychiatrists would come in and say, oh, I hear you've been crying. Have you been having thoughts? There must be a problem. Let's bottle this up with some medications. And to be honest, I feel like they should have been coming in before, when I was on that exercise bike, when I was like, this is just a blip, and I feel like I had to advocate for myself that I just need this space to feel it all. And not only did I grieve about cancer, but I let myself grieve about all of the, and thanks, Rebecca. Yes, you're so true. All of, the things that I pushed down in my life before that moment. Like, I had a really good life, don't get me wrong, but we've all gone through things, right? Bad breakups or whatever it may be. And I gave myself in those 4 days, literally, I think it was 4 days. I didn't stop. I just wept and I wept and I wept. But I think I was like, pouring out so much of that hurt and illness that was inside. But anyhow, for me, I would say that was my biggest release, or quote unquote cure, if you want to.
I have goosebumps. Like, there are so many things that you have just said that I would love to talk forever about. Can I ask you a question? Can I go back to something? So, when you said you almost still missed your life, like right when after you had the diagnosis, was it kind of like you were on this tightrope, this like precarious tightrope, and like on one side it could have been like, yeah, you miss it and you just kind of give up and whatever, and then on the other side it's like this portal into a more kind of meaningful life? Like, did it feel precarious for you? Like, you could have gone one way or the other?
Great question. No, so I was so oblivious to self-reflection.
Okay.
That depth. I truly, I describe it on autopilot. I don't know how else to describe it. I was sitting here, so superficial. I couldn't get down here to really experience the emotion, and for me, it was this instant wake-up call. I didn't see it before this moment. And then I 100% saw it in the next moment, because it was instigated by a trigger for me. And I've shared it on the show before, but it's, we had to hire this new nanny. And this new nanny brought my kids in to see me in the hospital room. And all of a sudden I was struck by her presence. Like, she just seemed like this complete stranger in our family space amidst our most vulnerable and precious of moments. And she, I could watch her when she was leaving with my kids. She put my kids in the vehicle and she packed them up. And all of a sudden I panicked. Like, I went into sheer panic, and I was like, oh my gosh, is she going to buckle their seatbelts? Is she going to signal when she changes lanes? Is she going to speed on her way home? Like, does she realize what precious cargo she's carrying? I wanted to be the one driving home with my kids. I wanted to be the one putting them to bed and standing on every mountain with them and being the first to wake them up in the morning. And that was my job. I didn't want to pass that off to anybody else. And so for me, it was like an instant shift where all of a sudden I felt like I had zero control over my life, my world, my most precious beings in that vehicle. And that's when I had that trigger, if you call it, and it all just came out. And so it wasn't this like, it wasn't so much a choice, but it was this instant reality check of, oh my gosh, like, I really think I was so oblivious. I was so far gone on this autopilot of life that I needed those 4 white walls in my hospital room. Like, at some points I was shackled to my hospital bed because unconsciously I was trying to pull out my tubes and whole 9 yards, right? But I needed to be shackled to learn these lessons that have then propelled me to live this life. So I feel like I'm the luckiest girl, but I've digressed a lot.
That's probably my fault. I apologize.
No, you're incredible. But we need to get back to to the root of why you are here today, because you are just this incredible, incredible force. So Dr. Alex, she's this powerhouse. She's like this tiny little miniature being, but she has so much force and so much light within her. So Dr. Alex is a psychologist. She works a lot with kids and with parents, and she is here to she's on a mission currently as we speak. She's taken a rest day today, my friends, but she is currently on a mission to raise awareness, to raise funds, and to advocate for kids and parents to have unrestricted access to quality mental health care when they need it and if they need it at any time. And so Alex's mission really speaks to my heart, obviously because of this story for so many reasons, but obviously as well because I'm a young mom and from everything we went through. And I've realized that there's a great unmet need in today's society where these young families facing, especially with young parents, facing these huge hurdles, they don't have the supports in place to help with their children. When you take a young mom out of the house, that is a lot to fill. Those children, those babies have a lot of questions. I don't have the resources in myself to be able to answer all of those questions in the most appropriate ways all the time. And so when we looked for those resources, there were none to be found in the adult-centered hospital. Whereas if you can compare a child being diagnosed with cancer devastatingly, let's say let's say BC Children's Hospital, there are tons of supports, not just for that child, but for the parents and for the siblings. But when it's a young parent involved, there are no child psychologists at the adult-centered hospitals. And I was admitted full-time after minutes after hearing I had this diagnosis, after not even complaining I had been feeling unwell. You know, your world is pulled out from under you. You're trying to navigate things at home. You're trying to survive. It's so much. These parents need more supports and these kids need more supports. And so Dr. Alex's mission really resonates with me. And I just think she's this incredible force and she needs to tell us all about it. So the stage is yours, Alex. Take it away.
Well, first of all, thank you. When you reached out, I knew I had to take a rest day, and you're right. So I'm in Calgary now. I left Vancouver, and you came to my send-off, which was so incredibly sweet. I loved meeting you, and I thought I was gonna have to wait till September to chat with you again in Vancouver. But so this is so great. There's a fly in my Airbnb. That's why I keep swatting it around.
I'll preface to my audience that Alex and I met on Instagram. Social media is a powerful connector. And Dr. Alex had sent out some really beautiful notes to my Instagram page and saying, you know, just how meaningful some of my posts had been on her path. And then I watched her profile and what she was up to. And I was like, gosh, when is your send off? I want to be there. And so I went to meet her in person. And the first thing she said to me was, you know, I don't stalk people on Instagram, I promise, but you were just different. And she's just the cutest force, I've got to say.
It was so funny though, Erica, really. And because I don't even know how I came across your profile. I think we have a mutual friend. And there was just something about your comment or something that you wrote that drew me to you. I think it's what I said before. It's like your courage is contagious. And one thing I've learned is like when you're trying to do courageous things, you need courageous people around you, right? Because it's lonely. It really is. And so I think that's why you're saying it very nicely, but I feel like I just forced my way like really into your DMs.
And then very much welcomed. You're very much welcomed. You're a sweet, 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 sweet human. Yeah. And I'm happy. Like, I feel like it was meant to be, you and I.
I think it was meant to be. Yeah. So anyway, so you came to my send-off last Saturday in Vancouver. And from last Saturday to now, I've gone from Vancouver to Calgary. And it is wild. Like, it really is surreal because I'm not a cyclist, right? Like, I bought a bike 3 months ago. This whole thing is very new. Like, it's a very bold step. And just to speak to your point earlier, like, really the reason I'm doing this is because there is a bit of a crisis, right? Like 3 in 4 kids in Canada who need access to mental health care, they just can't get it, right? Like the costs are too high, the waits are too long. And what's especially troubling about it is that we have so many treatments that actually work, right? And so psychologists love this, right? We love just treating people and seeing their successes. And of course, it's not always easy, right? And of course, sometimes it's complicated, but some of the time there are relatively easy fixes, even for things that feel insurmountable. So that's sort of the motivation, the kind of rationale behind why I've just
If these kids could just get into you and get the access, then their lives could be improved drastically with relatively simple measures sometimes.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's kind of the point. And I think like what you were saying earlier about emotions and suffering, I think like as a culture, we just shy away from complicated feelings. It's kind of like we treat them as if they're dangerous, right? Like I think of a whack-a-mole sometimes, like we try to stamp them out, like grief, anxiety, sadness, we just try to get them to just get out of the way. And the irony is that when we try to do that directly, all we actually do is prolong the pain.
Yes.
And we miss out on the valuable lessons that the emotions actually have to teach us. So that's why your story just speaks to me so much, is because I think the reason you got to where you are now is because you knew you couldn't just stamp them all out. Like you had to acknowledge them. And then when you did, you were really connected to your values, which then allowed you to make the decisions that you've made to bring you to where you are today.
Yeah, the acknowledgement is a big part. I completely 100% agree. But then it's also just sitting in it, and really allowing yourself that space to experience it and go through it and cry it out or sing it out, whatever you need to do to get that out versus storing it and just experiencing it. So the awareness, definitely step one is like, holy cow, look at what I'm going through.
Yeah.
Like this is a feat in itself, but then processing, how do I actually feel about it? Because you're right, emotions do serve to create a behavioral response, right? That we need for our survival. And if we don't acknowledge that emotion, then we don't do the behavior that should be coming in tow. And we miss that whole beat. And so for me, I'll give the example of cancer again, right? So people are always like, oh my gosh, you're so positive. You're so positive. You just knew you're going to survive. And that is not the case. Like, yes, I've had an outlook, on life that has been more upbeat and more optimistic, but it's with a dose of hearty dose of realism. Mm-hmm. I've never been like, when I had 2 months to live from 2 international institutions, I prepared for the worst. Yeah. I wrote all of those dire, heartfelt memory albums and I did all the recordings for my kids. I prepared, I arranged finances. There was no stone left unturned, but going through that process, right, allowed me to feel those emotions of, holy cow, I'm facing this huge fire-breathing dragon of cancer, right? And this thing could take me out. All he needs to do is blow a little bit more fire and I'm done, right? And had I not gone through that process, excuse me, my voice is a bit scratchy, I wouldn't have felt those emotions of how deeply I wanted to be here for grade 7 graduation one day, or how deeply I wanted to be here for XYZ with my kids. And then I wouldn't have created the appropriate behavioral response of fueling myself in every way I could have to make that goal come true. So I call it realistic optimism versus unrealistic optimism, when we often try to avoid those hard emotions, right? And then we push those emotions away and we're just like, oh, I'm going to be fine. I'm going to be fine. But how silly would that have been, if my kids turned 25 and I hadn't been fine with this 2 months terminal prognosis, right? And they're like, Mom didn't even write us a letter. She didn't even acknowledge like this beast of cancer, right? And it kind of, positivity is great, don't get me wrong, but artificial positivity, I think, is toxic and can just hurt us so much unless we're going through that real space of feeling the emotions first, right? And then we can be our most authentic, positive self. So once I went through that process of preparing for the worst, getting that over, knowing what my goal was surviving for all these moments, then I could just be, and I was so happy in each one of those moments. And so it really changes your entire outlook. Then I could shine forth my authentic positivity, if that makes sense.
I could not agree more with what you're saying. It's like you didn't swing to the end of too much positivity, toxic positivity, really, and you didn't swing to the end of complete hopelessness, and like that just made you unable to act. I think the term is like emotional agility, right? Like you were able to use the emotions for the purpose that they are intended for, and then act in a way that was congruent with your values.
I often call it expecting the best, but preparing for the worst, right? And so I was always prepared for the worst, but I always expected the best. And don't get me wrong, in those early weeks when I was on autopilot, I admit that was toxic positivity. And I
Right.
think I was just making myself more sick.
Which-
Everything, my perspective on everything in that time was dangerous to my mental health and my physical health. Like I would see chemotherapy coming in. I'm a sports chiropractor by trade, right? And so I love natural healthcare options wherever possible. And so chemotherapy, I just saw as killing every part of me, and I had a really negative attitude at first about this chemotherapy just pouring into me 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I had to change my perspective on that and see it as my sunshine vitamin, and because that was the only thing that was my lifeline at that time to get me out in the sunshine with my kids. And it's the same thing with all of my immunosuppressants today. They cause a lot of ramifications. They are not easy medications to take. But those are my sunshine vitamins, So it really does come down to that perspective once we feel that emotion about it. But I admit I was that toxic positivity girl beforehand.
Listen, I have also been there. I think anyone who's been through anything really, really hard at times has the urge to just discount it all and push it all away. I think it's natural, and because it's kind of what our culture tells us to do. It's like, okay, we can have joy and we can be happy if we just like pretend this stuff doesn't exist. And the irony is just so profound to me because it actually takes you in the opposite direction, which is kind of what we've been talking about, right? It's like it's kind of like denying the difficult emotions actually gets in the way of experiencing joy. It's not the other way around,
Well, I do a lot of work with Dr. Gabor Mate, who I just absolutely adore. And, he talks openly too about, and when we experience a traumatic event, right, our brain, it's almost too much for us to process originally. And we all kind of have to go on that autopilot survival mode for a short time, but we can't live there. We can't stay in that zone. And so we have to wake up from that at some point. And we all have our different instigating factors as to what helps us wake up.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I meant when I used the example of a tightrope, because I think in these crisis moments, at some point, you do have to step away from the toxic positivity. But it's very possible that you don't, right? Like sometimes people don't. And then that leads to a whole bunch of other consequences. So it's like these times of intense suffering and crisis, it's like there are these portals to this like magical place if you can let them be that. But it's hard. Like, and that's kind of why I'm doing this, to bring it back to the bike ride, is because how would you know if you're a parent of a kid who is struggling? Like, how would you know that, right? Like, how would you know? Because most parents really want the best for their kids, right? Like, we're just wired to protect them. We don't want them to suffer. We just want them to be okay. So sometimes we might respond to their distress by just kind of denying it or pushing it away or pretending it's not there, not realizing that that's actually, although it's well-intentioned, it's not helpful. And so without access to care, how would you know that? Because most people can't realize that just for themselves, because like nobody really teaches us these things. Sure. And then when it comes to your kids, the fear is even greater because you want to protect these little people, right? Yeah. So it's just the consequences are big when it comes to this kind of stuff.
So Alex, how do you support these kids and their parents? So when a child first comes to your office and the parents come, how do you support them? What's the process?
Yeah, so it really kind of depends on what the problem is. So sometimes if they're in deep crisis, like, right, this is a safety situation, that's one category, right? And in those moments where this is an acute situation, like some kind of trauma has recently just happened, and this is like a short-term crisis phase where really, like, what you want is you just want to stay safe and keep surviving. Like, it's in these moments where you don't care about strategies, you don't care about coping things, like, no, like, you, in those moments, you just got to be connected and keep going. And it's so funny with this bike ride. I expected this a little bit, but not fully, just how many situations come up that remind me of situations in the office. I just want to tell you one because I think
Yeah,
it's
I'd
so
love to hear them.
interesting. And so I was on the Coquihalla Highway, which I
Like,
do not recommend.
we have to break this down a bit more. Like this girl again, she's biked from Vancouver, British Columbia, all the way through the mountains in British Columbia, the Coquihalla Highway. Like, I think there's a show on TV about the dangers of driving on the Coquihalla Highway for like big trucks, like big rigs. And this like tiny little frame is out there biking up these mountains, you know, on her bicycle. So listen up, Rises and Thrivers, because she's so right on this. And I can't believe the feats that you have accomplished already just to get to Calgary for these kids and parents. You're amazing.
Aw, thank you. I really believe in it. In like big picture, I see the bike ride as symbolic of the challenges that parents and kids face. But so to talk about an example of a crisis moment. Now I know this isn't like cycling on the Coquihalla. That's not like a major life event, right? Like we know it's temporary. It's going to be okay. So, but I'm just using it as an example. So when I was on there, luckily, I ran into these two other crazy people who were cycling. Thank God, because I think if I hadn't, I would not have made it through.
Okay.
And there was about 45 minutes where I am not exaggerating. The shoulder was, I think it was 5 inches. Like I think it was like 3 or 4 inches. So on the one side, you have trucks just like barreling by you, and then on the other side, you have a cliff. Like so, like any error, I felt like I'm dead, you know, and it's like in those. I don't know if it was actually a crisis, right? Like if I was a more seasoned cyclist, perhaps I would have had my wits about me more. But for me, it really was a crisis. And it's so fascinating. Like in that moment, literally everything else went out the window. The only thing I cared about was staying connected, like looking at these other two strangers who I just met. And what's so funny is they were really slow, right? Like they were carrying a whole bunch of stuff with them. They had like 100 pounds of, I could have just sped off. Like really, but by staying with them, I was on there for longer than I needed to be. But I didn't care about that. Like all I cared about was being connected to something with a heartbeat. Like that was all I needed to get through that moment. And it just struck me, like, because when parents and kids come in and there's this acute crisis, we don't talk about problem solving or strategies. Like we talk about just let's keep the wheels on the bus, let's stay connected, and let's stay safe. So that's one phase. Very long answer to your question.
No, it's a great answer. Yeah.
And then that's not always why people come in though, right? Like sometimes, usually they come in because they've been struggling for a while with, I work with a lot of kids with anxiety. So maybe they're having a lot of difficulty getting to school because they have school anxiety, or maybe they have social anxiety. So they're avoiding any kind of, social situation, or maybe they have debilitating worries. So in that situation, what we do first is we normalize that this is okay. Like everybody has anxiety. It exists on a spectrum, right? Some of us have very little, some of us have a lot. At a certain point, it becomes something that interferes with our life. But that's okay because we can deal with it. So first we normalize it. Like a fear response is good. Like if you're driving on the Coquihalla Highway and you don't have a fear response, you're dead because you're not going to be paying attention and you're going to swerve into traffic. So it's very useful. The problem is with kids with anxiety is their kind of fear alarm, it's just a bit too sensitive. So their fear alarm is going off when it doesn't need to go off. Like it's going off when they have to go to school or when they have to face a social situation. So we educate the family about this is okay. Like we know how anxiety works. We know that it's treatable. We know that you're just having a false alarm right now. And what we're going to be doing in treatment is basically we're going to be working to face your fears so that false alarm gets a little bit less sensitive. And just that, some of the time, can be enough to help. Because usually when people come in, they think there's no cure for this. Like I'm screwed. Like my kid is never going to be okay. They're never, they're never going to have a normal life. And there's a lot of panic. So when you can just normalize that we got this, just that brings down the stress levels and it opens up choice points for being creative with problem solving and being able to move forward. And you can imagine it calms parents down a lot because they're like, okay, this is gonna be fine. Like there are things that we can do to help with this. And then we get into facing fear exercises and a bunch of other things. But the bottom line is, yeah, go ahead.
It seems like you, so on my journey, I felt held, by so many forces and so many people and, powers above. I felt held, and it seems like you're creating a space for these families to be held.
I love how you said that. It's so interesting because I think it speaks to this idea that it's not our emotions that are the problem. It's feeling alone in our emotions that's the problem.
Yes.
Like, I think we live in this culture that divides emotions into good and bad. Like, the good ones are happy, the bad ones are sad. But they're just things, right? Like, they don't say anything about who we are as people. And usually when parents and kids come in, they have attached themselves to their emotions in a way that is really unhelpful. Like, I am a scared kid. Like, I am a person who is, very scared. But thoughts
versus I'm currently feeling sad.
Yeah,
I'm currently
exactly.
feeling scared in this moment. Not that it's going to last into 2 hours or 4 days or 2 years or 5 years, but in this moment, this is what I'm feeling currently. Yeah,
Exactly. And I always say, like, feelings are not facts, and the thoughts we have, they're just guesses. Like, they don't necessarily reflect what's real. But
yes.
the problem is that, when kids are really anxious and then parents are anxious because emotions are shared, they identify so much with these emotions, and it doesn't feel like there's a way out, right? It doesn't feel like there's a way out, and they kind of forget that we are not our emotions, our thoughts, and the stories that we tell ourselves.
Yeah,
And
of course.
when we know that, there's space to make decisions in accordance with our values, as opposed to just in reaction to the things that we're feeling.
Yeah, something in a way that I try to describe it with my kids, because we try to label a lot of emotions, right? And we try to go through the process, but and explain that all these emotions have a behavioral response, but at the same time, it can be like a bit of a concept for them to understand, right? And so I always use an example of what we were just walking by this pond the other day, and I had my boys, and my youngest said, "Oh my gosh, mommy, like that pond is just nasty,"
Yeah.
And it was really a nasty pond. And I said, okay, so what, like, just use this as an example for my kids so they can learn from it. What emotion does that evoke in you?
Mhm.
Right. And they were like, I don't know, it's just gross. And I was like, well, what do you feel about it? And then my youngest said, I was like, well, I'm disgusted by it. And I was like, great, you're disgusted. So what does the emotion of disgust cause you to do? Right. He said, I don't know, mommy. I don't know what you're talking about. But I said, do you want to jump in the pond, dude? And he was like, oh no. And I was like, see, that emotion of disgust, it's a survival mechanism. It's saving you from jumping into that pond. Right. And so if you see a gross apple, it's all super moldy on the table and you feel disgust. If I didn't experience that emotion, what am I going to do? Bite into that gross apple? It's the same thing if I'm feeling sad, or if I'm feeling whatever I'm feeling, nervous or whatever in that moment. I'm not always feeling disgust, but in this moment with what's presented in front of me with this gross apple or this gross pond, I'm currently feeling this disgust, right? And so for some reason, that seems to be one that's easier for them to grasp.
I love that you're even having that conversation. And it's really like what the research tells us is that helping kids with what we call emotional granularity, like being able to tell the difference between, like disgust and jealousy and scared. And it's actually a buffer when it comes to them having to regulate more difficult emotions down the road. So that's amazing that you're doing that.
My youngest will bring me these videos, and he likes to try to decipher, I guess on some sort of platform, he sees videos where they're showing a face and it's just like a plain face, like whatever the expression is on the face. And it's saying, or just the eyes or whatever it's showing. And it says, try to guess which emotion it's revealing, the eyes or whatever. And he's like, I'm good at this. And, so he's going through the process and he learns a lot from doing that too. It's really insightful. So, yeah, it's quite a healing process, I think, for them. My kids have been through a lot, right? With our whole journey, and then divorce that came 6 weeks after I was finally home from hospital, right? And this is why I'm so passionate about having more resources for these families, because these families deserve a better chance of staying intact and staying together. You know, my husband needed more resources.
Yeah.
My kids needed more resources. I could go on and on and on, but my kids deserved a better chance for
Yes.
us staying together when we faced this brutal cancer diagnosis. And they don't tell you when you're sitting there. I said this in my TED Talk. They don't tell you when you're sitting there hearing the words of your diagnosis, holding your husband's hand, that 50% of marriages facing
Yeah.
a cancer diagnosis will end in divorce. And worse yet, if you're a married woman facing a cancer diagnosis, you have a 6 times higher average of facing divorce than
Wow.
a married man would have facing a similar prognosis. And you know, they needed to tell us that, because we needed to take the steps to be more proactive. In my mind, it was just, okay, this is brutally hard. It's survival mode. We need to get through this, right? And then we can fix us kind of once we're over this. But you know, I didn't realize how disconnected we were. Obviously, I'd been living in the hospital. I spent years in the hospital. I was always asked by a hospital staff what floor I worked on. I would try to get dressed as best I could every day. And they'd be like, "What floor do you work on? I see you here all the time." And I'm like, "Oh, no. I'm a permanent resident." You know, that would be hard for any marriage to overcome, you know,
Yes.
let alone despite all the other survival battles that we had to face in tow with that. And you know, my ex-husband almost lost me so many times
Yeah.
over. He would have to pull back emotionally. And obviously I wasn't at my best. And,
Yeah.
you know, and I made mistakes. And we just, like, for me, I think one of the biggest mistakes I made was when I had 2 months to live. I didn't realize how much I hurt him in this time where, in my mind, young mom, you know, my babies are just babies. And if I have 2 months to live, my entire focus was on preparing these journals, photo albums, everything for my kids, right? The recordings, because they were so tiny. I had so many lessons, so many things I needed to tell them about how much I utterly adored every tiny little thing about them. And I didn't have enough time. You know, I felt like I needed to bottle all of it somehow, all of my love for all these moments. And I didn't have enough time, energy, or effort. I was dying to do it all in that time, you know? And so for me, I admit my entire focus in that time was, if my kids were napping or they'd go to bed at 7 at the time, in bed, my entire focus was dedicated to these measures of leaving them with whatever I could leave them with. And later, only later did I learn that, of course, that made him sad, because all of the free time that I had was allocated to that, or I'd be sleeping. And if my kids were awake, I was awake with them. And so I missed the beat. You know, I wasn't perfect either. But these families need supports, right? And they need better supports in place to better support them. And I think we were able to get, I don't know, a community, a social worker, maybe, who came over once a month for 2 hours to help with, you know, some things with the kids. But, you know, there's so many things that you need help with when a mom is taken out of the house. My ex is a lawyer by trade, you know, and then now he's got to be full-time parent, and who's making an income, and how do we cover the fort? You know, how there aren't enough bodies, you know, and you need so many. You need like a daycare at these hospitals to have a positive space for these families to connect, because you go to this leukemia floor and it's a steep learning curve. You know, there's so many things that these families need. So I admire your efforts so much when you're going up that Coca-Cola and you're thinking of these families. I can't even tell you how much I respect you for taking the time to do this mission on behalf of kids and families and parents who really need it. And you're just such a light in the world. Where is your next stop tomorrow going to be? When you get on your bike tomorrow, where are you off to?
That's so encouraging to hear. So tomorrow I'm going to Brooks, Alberta. So we're in a new phase because we're done with the mountains, and now we're like lots of mileage on flats, which who knows how I'll handle that. It's long though tomorrow. It's the longest ride I'll ever have done if I finish it. It's 178 kilometers. So there's a lot of unknown here, right? Like there's a lot of uncertainty on purpose, right? Because I want to mirror like the experience that families have. So we don't know, like I might have to take a break. We have no idea, but I'm going to do my best. And hopefully I'll be in Brooks, Alberta tomorrow, which I've never been to.
Well, as they say to us when you're pregnant and expecting, like just enjoy that time before it's over, like go as slow as you need to do and just soak in the beauty of all of the nature and exploring Canada and just sink into it all around you. Like, I think you're amazing.
Thank you for saying that. Actually, I needed to hear that because it's easy for me to get so laser focused on like what is the mission that I miss what's around me easily. So yes, I'm gonna do my best to take in the good and take in the beauty.
Yes, because this is such an experience, like that once in a lifetime experience, frankly, in all honesty, of going across the country and getting to explore all that Canada has to offer. How many of us have even done that in a car, let alone pedaling? Like you're just such a force.
Erica, thank you so much. Like you have also, privately given me so much encouragement that I have needed on some very low days in this process, right? Like it's not all good. It's hard. So I really, really appreciate that.
I'm here cheering you on. How can my audience support you, support your mission? Do you have a fundraiser? Where can they watch you? Tell us all about it.
Yeah, so there's 3 parts to, we call it the Break the Cycle campaign. First is raising awareness. Second is raising funds. So I've chosen these different charities across the country who are doing really good work to service kids. So there's a donation link in my bio on Instagram. It all gets held at Charitable Impact. And then at the end, I split it all across all the charities. And then the third thing is sharing knowledge. So like I said earlier, sometimes with these mental health things, really all you need is a little bit of knowledge. And so I'll be sharing that on Instagram as well. So Instagram is really the place to be.
And what's your Instagram profile? Let everyone know, because I know they can see it here on the video, but for all those who aren't watching.
Oh, yes. It's at DRALEX DIGIAC at Dr. Alex DiGiacomo, DIGIAC.
Perfect. And you can find her connected to my profile there as well. I take her all the time. She's just great.
Thank you so much, Erica.
Thank you, Alex. We will have you on the show again. You're just a wealth of wisdom and insight and light. So thank you. I see us working together one day somehow, some way. So we'll have to configure that as we go forward. But
I don't stalk just anyone. So
I'm flattered. Okay, risers and thrivers, we hope you love this show. And 2 weeks up from now, we will be bringing you Dr. David Harper. He'll be telling us all about the keto diet and its impact on inflammation, cancer, your general health and wellness. So tune in for that one too. All the best, risers and thrivers. Make the best out of today. It's a great day to be alive.